system. So without further ado, I want to let folks know that we will allow for a Q&A after all presentations are over. So please hang around. At the bottom of your screen, you'll see Q&A. That's where you can input questions. If you're afraid you might forget it later, go ahead and put it in now, and then we'll get to it after all presentations are complete. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it right over to Daniel Griffith, and thank you for being here.
Hey, I appreciate it, Pat. I appreciate the intro. I'll let the slide come up. Do you want me to talk before the video or the video before the talk? You guys tell me.
Totally up to you.
Why don't we play the video first? We'll see how it goes, and I'll fill in the blanks following.
We work in isolation. Some of us like it that way. But our work is isolating, and that is the problem. We push for corn and carbon, but what about community? Resilience is diversity in motion, but where is the diversity? The Commonwealth Network is a nose-to-tail community of restorative and holistically managed farms and homesteads of all sizes that seeks to regenerate the souls of our communities in order to then heal their soils. Our mission is to inform, educate, and aggregate so that small producers can have a big impact in our regenerative movement. For example, we offer regenerative finance solutions alongside proven grass genetic livestock donations to foster abundance at the community level. It is a redefinition of capital, of wealth, from something supplied to something cultivated. Through education and mentorship and strategic market opportunity, we are scaling the regenerative movement by keeping it small.
Well, you can cut it off there. Just kind of peters off slowly. Yeah, so as Pat said, my name is Daniel Griffith. My wife and I run a decently sized farm here in Nelson County, Virginia. It's called Timshel Wildland, raising grass-fed beef and heritage hogs. It's a multi-species, diversified operation, orchards, gardens, and the like. That's what we call our day jobs, and we love farming, but we also have a massive community component. And I'm also the co-founder and executive director of the Robinia Institute. Robinia, an institute in its own right. We're also the Mid-Atlantic hub with the Savory Institute, a global organization working to regenerate grasslands all around the world. And so we are Savory's arm here in the Mid-Atlantic, and we do courses, consultations, land transition consulting, conservancy type events, basically from Ohio down to Alabama, over to South Carolina, and up back through Pennsylvania. So more or less the entire East Coast south of New York. That's the areas that we work in. And the issue that I really wanted to speak very briefly about is really the issue of that video that you saw. It's the idea of community in regenerative farming, right? In conservation and ecological understanding, we have this idea of a biome, right? A grouping of life together working in a microclimate or a climate, what have you. But that also happens in the human sphere as well, right? We are a part of the natural world. The natural world is a part of us. And so the same paradigms, that the same truths that we see, all around us are also contained within us. And I think 2020 and now 2021, we have a pretty clear reality that to help heal the local environment, right? To help build soil, sequester carbon, increase biodiversity, purify and clean the air and the waters, all things that the regenerative farmer is trying to do while also producing really good food in the process for humanity, including wildlife habitats and the like. You know, in 2020 and 2021, we also found that the community component of that system, of that regenerative system, was missing a hub in the wheel, if you will. One of the bolts wasn't exactly turned tight enough, and that's dealing with processing, but it's also dealing with farmers, helping farmers to solve the needs of the local community. We had a tour come out, a sorority from UVA, actually, as crazy it is, came out, they did a wildland tour, and they asked when they were leaving, probably 20 girls, college seniors at UVA, they asked, what can we do to support this work, to heal our local economy and our local ecology? And I said, if all of you were to buy meat, all of your meat from one farm, our farm, we would sell out in a matter of a week or two, right? And we're 400 acres, max capacity at 400 acres. And so there's no such thing as competition, right? And I think this blew their mind a little bit, at least I hope it impacted their soul. It's the understanding that in microclimates, in the local community, we can't have enough small scale, family run regenerative farmers. We just can't have enough, right? And so competition doesn't exist. Rather, what we need to be pushing for is community. And as I said, there was a moment in 2020, 2021, where we realized one of the bolts in our wheel wasn't screwed in all the way, and that's processing. In 2020, most small scale regenerative producers, regardless if they were climate focused or not, lost access to processing. And so that video talks about a network, we call it the Commonwealth Network, which is banding together smallholder producers and throwing them into more of a co-op type situation. It's not a legal co-op, but mentally or philosophically, the foundation of what the organizational structure is. It is a co-op, producers coming together to solve the greater needs of that community. And so we're working with processing, bringing in local infrastructure capital investment so that small scale farmers can actually get to scale by managing what they have. Right? If you have 10 acres and you can only farm 7 of those acres, you're missing 3 acres. When I say farm, I mean heal that ecosystem. And so we're bringing in capital to make sure that that happens. Mentorship markets, it's all included. And then the processing component, that end last tangent is really the work that we're focused on today. So I am thrilled to be here today. I encourage all of you guys, if you have questions, ask. I would love to participate in the Q&A. I'm assuming everybody else has a lot bigger and better things to say. So maybe the questions will gravitate there, but thanks again for having me.
Thank you, Daniel. Appreciate you being here. And I'm just north of you in Charlottesville, so I'll swing by and
hey,
pick up some pig.
Hey, absolutely. We got plenty.
Without further ado, I want to hand it right over to Alan Rowson with Northern Virginia Conservation Trust on the paper, which he co-authored. It's entitled Conserving Virginia's Landscapes for the Future. And Alan, you're muted, buddy.
Sorry about that. You might have muted me at some point there. No, I appreciate that, Pat. And Daniel's a hard act to follow. I will do the best I can here. I wish I had a nice, cool video to show as well. This is a session about conserving Virginia's landscapes for the future. As Pat said, I'm Alan Rowson. I'm Executive Director of the Northern Virginia Conservation Trust. We're based in Fairfax County, which is a lot different than Nelson County, but we've been working to save nearby nature throughout some of the state's most developing and urban areas for nearly 30 years. And I was proud to work on this paper and these recommendations with Kate Wofford from the Alliance for the Shenandoah Valley, because our two organizations likely couldn't have more different landscapes or more different priorities. And yet the tools we have to work with across the state are largely the same, and thus have been very effective and adaptable over time. Despite that effectiveness, though, there's still so much more we need to do, and quickly, with development pressures, climate change, and population growth adversely affecting our land, water, and wildlife. Just about any place in the Commonwealth that you enjoy visiting or recreating in has been protected because of affirmative policies. Ensure their future. Without that commitment, most of these parks and outdoor places would have been lost forever. And it's incumbent upon us to add to them and create more of them. This is also about much more than recreation. It's about our way of life. Having tools and funding to conserve key land and water resources means that working farms across our state can continue to operate. And it means that people in underserved communities have clean water, access to the outdoors, and healthy air to breathe. Unfortunately, though, over the last 20 years, 335,000 acres of Virginia's farmland, and there are similar statistics for the loss of forests, wetlands, and this while climate change brings us droughts, heat waves, flooding that stress our land and waters beyond their capabilities and put us at a critical point in our state's future. Invest dedicated permanent funding in our outdoors or watch it disappear. In just the last 2 years, conservation organizations like mine have submitted over $100 million in land and water conservation projects to Virginia's premier conservation grant program. But we've only seen 14 million of those projects funded. That's not sustainable and won't get us there. The choice is stark and the time is now. But luckily, Virginia has some incredible tools to build from that just need more consistent resources to make a huge difference. Combine that with a creation of at least one new conservation program, a program that would really focus on urban communities and close to home outdoor recreation. And we would really, I think, have a model in Virginia that could be pushed throughout the state, and something that I think nationally would also get attention as being something everybody would want to have. So without further ado, those programs, and you can certainly, read our paper on them are, and I won't, read it specifically, but we're urging a reinvestment in and protection of the land preservation tax credit program. It really is Virginia's greatest conservation program. It's protected over 1 million acres of land in the last 20 years, and it shouldn't be attacked. It needs to be protected and enhanced. I think our ability to continue to have that tool to protect places like Daniel's farm, others many like them, others just like them, but also urban conservation as well is critical. So we need the land preservation tax credit, and we need it to be protected. Similarly, we need to continue investing in Virginia's 3 most critical land conservation grant programs. The land preservation, the Virginia Land Conservation Foundation needs funding at $40 million annually. Right now, it's funded at significantly less than that. We also need to invest $5 million in each year in the Virginia Battlefield Protection Program and the Virginia Farmland Protection Program. This so that farmlands and our history and culture are also protected. Finally, and as I stated earlier, we do need a new conservation program in the state of Virginia that meets the needs of at-risk communities that have been left out by conservation programs in the past. Places that are critical for clean water, for clean air, and access to the outdoors for communities that have traditionally not had them. And so we are recommending and are advocating for a new land conservation program that would focus on urban core communities, and one that fills in the gaps for those programs that we already have that work so well. These investments, if they could be made, are such a small fraction of the state budget, well less than 1%. But you would be hard pressed to find a better return on investment for programs that work, and in a changing world, something that we know that we must have. So it's critical for all of our landscapes, and as we heard from Daniel earlier, whether you live in a rural part of Virginia or whether you're in an urban part like mine up in Northern Virginia, these tools are critical. We're seeing changes happen on a daily basis that are taking away these resources forever. And so I'm pleased to be here to share this paper and to support in the work of so many other organizations that work throughout the state, and would be happy to answer questions and sort of delve more deeply into our policy recommendations for the year ahead, and how we get those funded and supported, not just this year, but permanently. So Pat, I'll turn it back over to you for our next presentation.
Thanks, Alan. Appreciate that. Again, as Alan said, you got questions, put them in the Q&A. We'll get to those after our presentations have concluded. Next up is Zachary Sheldon with Nation Conservancy about dedicated funding for conservation.
Thanks, Pat. And Thanks, Alan. You kind of set this up well, talking about the need for dedicated funding. I'm with the Nature Conservancy, and I'm talking today about our paper, Establishing Dedicated Funding for Increased Conservation. This isn't a new paper for our common agenda, but it takes a different approach. In previous years, we've really just kind of used this as an informational tool, showing what other states have done for implementing dedicated funding, the mechanisms they use. But this year, we've shifted our focus, and we're talking about the challenges that are facing the Commonwealth's environment. And one second. We've got dual threats of climate change and biodiversity loss, and there's a multitude of issues that are wrapped up in all of that. And our common agenda provides specific recommendations on how to address those, from stormwater and nutrient runoff to habitat loss and fragmentation. But when you look at all these issues throughout the common agenda, there's a common thread, and that is the need for significantly increased and consistent levels of funding. And so that is why we've shifting our focus now, calling on the General Assembly to establish this dedicated funding. And why are we doing this now? We're doing it now because we've wanted to do it for a long time. We've tried to do it for a long time, but in particular, there's a lot of reasons to look at this more. There's federal funding that is becoming available. In 2020, the Great American Outdoors Act was passed, which provides $900 million per year for the Land and Water Conservation Fund. And there's going to be additional federal funding most likely coming down our way, that if Virginia wants to maximize our ability to use these conservation funding programs, we need to have state funding available to match these programs and get them implemented in Virginia. In the past year and more than a year now, has shown Virginians' desire and need to get outdoors for recreation and mental health. As many of you are likely familiar with, we've seen overcrowding in all levels of cities, state, national parks, natural areas. People want to and need to get outside. And it's overwhelmed a lot of our systems and shown the desire for more. We've also in this, it's made clear the inequities to access to the outdoors, as well as the disproportionate health burdens carried by marginalized and underserved communities. And again, our common agenda has specific recommendations on policies and programs to address those, but funding will be needed for that. And then also there's continues to be and has been strong public support for dedicated funding. In fact, just earlier this year and then just last week, polling was released that showed that over 70% of Virginian voters want their state legislators to make a dedication of $300 million per year to conserve land, water, and wildlife. And so that ties right into our recommendation, where we are calling on the General Assembly to establish dedicated funding to provide at least $300 million for natural resource conservation that addresses a multitude of our common agenda's recommendations, in particular, or just for sure, some of the ones that Alan was just mentioning, but also many other issues that have been discussed elsewhere. I want to take a moment here to talk about how we've been crafting our dedicated funding recommendations. In land trusts in particular have been talking about this and working on this for years, trying to get it established. But this year's effort, we really made the point to have a broader coalition and work through more issues than what we've traditionally worked on in the past. So our proposal is addressing more than just our historic conservation issues. For several months, we've been meeting and inviting new groups, groups that work on urban conservation projects and in underserved communities. We've trails and recreational outdoor groups, and we've been consulting with Virginia tribes as well to build our recommendations on how this funding should be spent. Already, we have a proposal of over 120 million just from the land perspective of issues that need to be addressed. This includes the existing programs that Alan was talking about, as well as those new programs we would want to create there, but also tackling new areas such as urban tree canopies, looking at tribal land programs, and other issues that have been identified. And I just wanted to take a moment to say, this is an ongoing process, and we're continuing to look for new groups and partners to discuss and craft this larger proposal. And so if you're part of a group you think would be interested in working on this, please reach out to me. My email is at the end, and I'm sure it will be shared. And then the one other recommendation we were providing this year is to have the Secretary of Natural Resources and Natural and Historic Resources convene a working group just really examining the federal programs out there that Virginia has not been tapping into, because we do rank consistently near the bottom across the country in how much federal funding we get from these conservation programs. You know, we know some of it is the lack of available state matching grants, but there are other issues that could be identified. Could be maybe more technical assistance for groups that are maybe best situated to implement conservation projects that just aren't able to do it. But that's part of the recommendation, is just to try to examine more how we can tap into these federal funds. And I just wanted to put my contact information there, as well as Chris Lane with Virginia League of Conservation Voters, who was the other author on this paper. If you're interested in getting involved, or if you have more questions, but that is my quick run through of our paper.
Thank you, Zachary. And any questions for Zachary or Alan or Daniel? Please put those in the bottom in the Q&A section. Next up, we've got Max Hokett with the American Battlefield Trust on protecting our historic and cultural resources. It's all yours, Max.
All right. Well, thanks for having me today. So I am, as was just said, I'm sharing our paper on historic and cultural resources. I work with the American Battlefield Trust. We work nationwide on Civil War, Revolutionary War, and War of 1812 battlefield preservation. But obviously, given Virginia's history, that is a pretty central place for us. And I spend most of my time working on Virginia. Virginia has unparalleled resources, really, for any state on the historic and cultural front, beyond just what we at ABT deal with, which focuses mostly on battlefields. I wrote this paper along with Elizabeth from Preservation Virginia and Adam Gilmwater from PEC, and so there's a wide community there of various opportunities for preservation. The Virginia does actually have more programs than many of the other states we work in, as far as finding matching grant funds for this kind of preservation. But Alan's presentation covered some of the same ground. There are programs that exist, but increased funding to those could really take advantage of some opportunities, particularly with federal funding, to maximize what Virginia is able to preserve. So to run through it again, the programs that really are fundamental to the work we do and other groups in the space is VLCF, the Virginia Land Conservation Foundation, the Virginia Battlefield Preservation Fund, VBPF, Land Preservation Tax Credit, and the Historic Rehabilitation Tax Credit. So those programs have existed for some time. And part of this paper was focusing on how those programs could both benefit from increased funding, but also can evolve to better serve Virginia and the preservation of the diverse history that hasn't always been prioritized. And so in recent years, adjustments have already been made at some by DHR particularly in VLCF and VBPF, to the way that their applications are scored and such, that has gained some ground on making sure that these grants are being awarded to a variety of organizations and variety of purposes, so that it's not just telling one narrative, specifically more preservation of African American historical cultural sites within the battlefield realm. That's meant increased focus on things such as Newmarket Heights, the Henrico County area, where there's specific history of that. So overall, our policy proposals within our paper kind of mirror Allen's. It's about, we were asking for $5 million in the Virginia Battlefield Protection Fund and 40 within VLCF, but also just highlighting that while changes have been made to broaden those programs out a bit and try to expand where that money is going to, that needs to continue to happen. And And that money, additional funds there would be coming at a specific moment in time here where there's federal funding available to match those grants more than there's ever been. LWCF's permanent funding has already been mentioned here. For us, we're matching these grants often when working in Virginia with American Battlefield Protection Program money that's funded at $20 million, which is a more than 100% increase from a couple of years ago. So there's federal money out there to be captured, and obviously historic resources. Once they're gone, there's not a lot of new opportunities there. It's the sort of nature of the game. So while there's the federal money, we think it's really in the interest of Virginia to provide the funding to snap up the federal dollars available and preserve these sites. So as far as particular proposals, talked about the dollar figures. We talked about continued adjustments to make sure that these programs are preserving a broad array of historical and cultural sites. And we don't work as much in this space, but the historical restoration tax credit program, strengthening that. Obviously, the land preservation tax credit is something a lot of us utilize, and also just encouraging the legislature, the General Assembly, to continue the work they've begun to provide some state money and programs that are dedicated towards protecting, documenting, identifying African American and Virginia Native American historic resources. And I believe that's all I have. Hand it back to Pat.
Okay, thanks, Max. Seeing some good questions in the Q&A. Keep them coming, and we will get to those. But without further ado, I want to hand it right over to Ann Jerzyk, who speaks for the trees.
There we go. That's better. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm really excited to be here to talk to you about trees. You can just call me Annie Appleseed from now on. That'll be just fine. My co-authors on this paper were Renee Grieb and Brent Hunsinger, so applause for them because they did a tremendous amount of work on this as well. Maybe you're here today because maybe you're a tree hugger, maybe you want more shade for the streets in your neighborhood, maybe you're concerned about climate change, maybe you're concerned about the loss of trees as pollinators and for wildlife habitat. Maybe your concern is water quality or internal flooding. And trees obviously help with all of this. But despite that, and let me just make sure I can advance my slides. Despite that, we're losing a tremendous amount of canopy every year. New data has come out. I've got the source files here, but the Chesapeake Bay program has got new 1 meter resolution data, and they said between 2014 and 2018, we've lost approximately 190,000 acres of forest. And of that, about 20,000 went into development. So if you think about that, the land that's gone into development, it'll never be forest. The rest of it might be reforested. It might become areas where there are solar farms, but the land that won't become forest again, we've lost the ability of that land to act as a sponge, right? To let water soak into the ground, to let those trees transpire water, which is what cools our neighborhoods. So we've permanently lost that ability. For the urban and suburban tree canopy, those acres actually went up. And if you think about it, it makes sense. If you put a subdivision where there once was forest, now you're going to have trees over top of turf. And so that's what's counted in this gain of 4,000 acres. So last year, Delegate Guy and Senator Marsden introduced legislation that would amend two pieces of code. The first has to do with the replacement of trees during development. The second one has to do with the conservation of trees during the development process. Both bills, they pretty much started out identically. They would have given local governments additional authority. And just a reminder for everybody, we're a Dillon rule state, therefore the state code has to enable localities to have this additional authority, right? So you may wonder, well, what's wrong with the existing code? The first thing is that the piece of code that has to do with the conservation of trees during the development process, it is currently limited to planning district 8. That's that upper right-hand corner of the map. It includes Arlington, Fairfax, Loudoun, Prince William, so the larger counties in Northern Virginia, but all the rest of the state can't access that, doesn't have the authority to adopt ordinances that would help those localities conserve their existing canopy. So the other area where it might be improved is that both pieces of code have a limit. The state currently caps the amount of canopy that a locality can ask the developer to replace when it's lost. And so what that looks like, what that feels like, if you think of you drive into a new subdivision and you see one newly planted red maple in the front yard, that's because in 20 years, which is how long they have to achieve this canopy goal, that maple will cover up 30% of the yard. So that's sort of the practical implication of this. So you can come in and convert forest to to a subdivision, and you're just going to get that one tree in the front yard. So that's what these canopy limits are currently having or doing on a practical basis. So Delegate Guy and Senator Morrison, in their introduced legislation, they basically said, hey, localities need additional authority. They need the ability to adopt higher canopy percentages if they're trying to deal with some issues that they care about. And some of those are, achieving an MS4 permit. They're, achieving their stormwater nutrient reduction goals. If they have formerly redlined areas and they've got some canopy equity issues that they're trying to address, and they're trying to reduce the heat island impact within their cities, then they would also be given this authority. If their comp plan, for instance, says that they want to achieve 40% canopy for the entire locality, and that's what many localities have as their goal, then they would also be able to adopt higher percentages. And the last is to reduce recurrent flooding if they're in the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Act area, which are the tidal waters that are east of 95. So what happened? So both the House and the Senate passed the bill, but they passed it with a reenactment clause. So that means it's coming back, folks. It'll have the same bill number. It might, and legislators have complete authority to do with whatever they want to with these bills, right? They can substitute brand new language. They can not reintroduce the bill if they don't want to. They can strike portions of it. They can amend, paragraph by paragraph. So there's nothing that says that these bills, as they were introduced last year, will look exactly like they are this in the coming year. And that's probably not going to happen because the language also said they had to have a stakeholder advisory group. So Pat Calvert's on it. There are other conservation leaders who are on it. But it's also got the home builders and the commercial builders and the agricultural community and the solar, utility solar folks. And so as well as local government, urban foresters and arborists are on the stakeholder group. And what they were told to do is to develop via consensus a path forward. So we hope that some language will come out in the report that will be coming out of the stakeholder group in the 1st of November, that language will say, we'll have something that we can all say, yeah, we can get behind this, and it'll it'll improve our ability to both preserve existing canopy as well as expand canopy, particularly over turf areas. All right, so you know, quickly, where do we go from here? I think the key thing is this is a local government issue. And so that's who needs to hear from you as advocates. Your legislator, absolutely. But getting your local government to say, we need this and we want this. Last year during the subcommittee meetings, we were really fortunate. We had, you know, the city of Hampton and Norfolk and Lynchburg, Charlottesville, Fairfax County, all speak in favor of this bill. We need more of that. Because they have absolutely got to hear, the legislators have got to hear that this is needed and wanted by local governments, or they're going to say, well, what's the problem? We don't see why this is an issue. We've got, right now is when those local governments are working on their legislative agenda. And so we've got a short and sweet paragraph that we would love to get included in their legislative agendas. We hope that VACO, Virginia Association of Counties, as well as the Virginia Municipal League, will also adopt this language so that, you know, you've got everybody pulling in the same direction saying, we want this additional authority to expand and preserve our tree canopy. If your legislator sits on House, County, Cities, and Towns, or sits on local government, Senate local government, those are the two committees who are going to hear this bill. They absolutely need to hear from you to say, I love trees. They are good for our community. They improve the quality of life where we live. You know, I really want to see you support this legislation. So I think we've got a tremendous tree coalition. If you're a VCN partner, then absolutely send a note to Pat Calvert, let them know you want to be added to this. If you're an individual advocate, you are also welcome. We meet approximately monthly. We share information about what we're hearing from our individual local governments about the challenges and the issues that they're dealing with to make sure that we address those moving forward. And like Pat said, with your help, this could be the year of the tree in 2022. And that's all I got, Pat.
Thank you, Annie Appleseed. Time is running and there are lots of great questions, so I'm not going to bother you with talking. Jill Auburn from the Virginia Association for Biological Farming is on. Tell us about climate smart and equitable farming systems for Virginia. It's all yours, Jill.
Thank you, Pat. Hi, everybody. I am a member of the policy team for VABF. We're a statewide organization in agriculture. I'm going to talk about a new policy paper that I'm actually not a co-author of, but my teammate from VABF, Francesca Costantino, is one of the primary authors. I'm going to see if I can share my screen here. Whoops, let's see. Yep, here we go. And you can see that in addition to VABF, this is actually coming from 3 organizations. Let me see if I can make this a little bigger. There we go. Well, that's the best I can do, I guess. This is coming from 3 organizations, and I think it's important. We're agricultural, but this is in the landscape section of the Common Agenda, and we are absolutely supporting the landscape. Agriculture covers some 30% or so of Virginia's landscape. This is important to the landscape, but it's also about people. And one of our teammates is from the Black Family Land Trust. So that's the equitable part that I'll talk about in a little bit. So regenerative agriculture is at the heart of this proposal. This is a new proposal for VCN. I don't have to go into too much detail here because Daniel did such a great job at the beginning of showing you how these different agricultural methods support the landscape and also support the people that farm the landscape and the people in the communities that support the landscape. But we're calling this regenerative agriculture to emphasize how it contributes back to the land. It helps to take carbon out of the atmosphere rather than put it in, and supports the health of the soil, the health of the farms themselves, the health of the people that depend upon it. If you want to know more about these techniques, you can go look at the Kiss the Ground, which is a streaming video documentary you can find online, or there's a free little clip about it on YouTube. I'm not going to click on that and take the time to show it, but you can go to YouTube and just Google Kiss the Ground if you want to see more about that particular video. So in addition to what's going on the farm, as Daniel again said so eloquently, there's a lot of reasons to focus on the processing infrastructure that is out in the communities to support the livestock component of these regenerative systems. And I'm not going to take the time to read through all of these bullet points because, again, Daniel did a great job talking about it, and I don't want to take your time, but you can skim down this list, and there are probably even many more reasons that the processing infrastructure is critical to making these livestock systems work and to supply their product to the communities and the people that really are eager to have these local resources and local food systems. And then why equity? Well, I don't think I should have to, in this day and age, explain this to anybody that really our history of discrimination against farmers of color, particularly Black farmers, we need to try to redress some of that. So, and they also are some of the most important small and mid-sized beef producers and chicken and livestock producers. So it's very complementary to be supporting the farming systems and the processing systems that that these farmers need to be successful. The last bullet about heirs property is a little bit technical. I can answer questions about that if people have it, but I'm going to skip past that in the interest of time. So the recommendations that we have in this paper are a number of things that would support this climate smart regenerative agriculture. And these are all based on existing programs. We're not trying to start some new funding program that would be complicated to set up. So we want to add some of these activities and systems to the agriculture cost share program. We want to explicitly direct some of the grants under the Ag and Forestry Industries Development Program toward the processing sector. It's really important, we think, to develop a better picture of the slaughter and processing facilities around the state. Where are they? What are they processing? What are the barriers to their success and to their growing? And then also farmers and other people need technical assistance to implement both some of these regenerative agriculture processes, and then also in the processing sector, there's a need to do some training. And then specifically to support farmers of color, we think there needs to be a census of farmers of color. We know a little bit about them from the ag census, but we really need to understand better who they are, what they're doing, what their barriers are, what we can do to help. And to set aside 15% of funding in a number of programs to these same programs, but targeted specifically at farmers of color. And then report annually to the General Assembly on the performance in serving farmers of color. So here's the contact information for Francesca Costantino, who's our lead author on this. She can probably best, I will try in the Q&A to answer any questions if you have them right away, but if you want to know more about this paper, she's the lead author on it, and if you want to chime in and help out, there's her contact information. Thank you.
Thanks, Jill. Appreciate that. So we've got some questions in here, and I'm going to jump right into them. If any more pop up, please please add those, and I will try to keep it to the remaining 10 minutes. So good question that probably Daniel and Jill might be able to address. It's do Virginia colleges and universities use local and sustainable sourcing for their cafeterias?
I'll chime in unless Daniel wants to. I think some do, but probably not to the extent that they could. I know there are some advocates of this at Virginia Tech, and probably some other community colleges I think are a great opportunity, but maybe Daniel has more direct experience.
Yeah, that's a good question. There's a number of institutions. 4P Foods is one of them that is working to eradicate this issue. UVA and a number of others actually source local and sustainable meats from 4P's distribution of Central Virginia. So it's growing, it's budding, it's a huge opportunity for both local farmers and also just for massive consumers who eat cafeteria food every day for 4 or 5 years straight to participate in this system. So a lot of hope there and a lot of work to be done for sure.
Great. And I'll tell you this just because I'm paying tuition. Sweetbriar College is definitely producing grapes for and other products from their greenhouses for a vintner nearby and others. So it's even going the other way around. Yeah. Question regarding solars. How do you see solar as a way to farm and to preserve land from development differently? This is from Diane Thomas. Is how do you see solar as a way to farm and preserve land from development differently? I'm not sure I completely understand the question, but
Is that then for Daniel or me then, since it's ag related, or is there somebody else that can speak to solar?
I can speak to it. I guess I can start, and if anybody wants to weigh in. Solar it's a big opportunity. We're not going to get out of energy needs. Obviously, there's some proponents of it and some not. I think there's a colleague of mine down in Georgia has increased his sheep operation to graze solar fields to eradicate the mowing and the degeneration that happens following, the mass mechanical implementation of solar panels. And so there's good hope there. We call it solar grazing. It's happening all around the country. Really good stuff to be done. It's possible. It's absolutely possible. I think that the energy use and spend also needs to be evaluated as well, right? Just producing more energy to produce more energy isn't the end goal, right? To produce energy that is needed and not wasted is obviously much better. But we can use livestock to regenerate those soils just as well as our farm, for sure.
Thank you both. There will be on another one of these weeks where we'll be covering, I believe it's the resilient discussion for Resilient Virginia. There will be a discussion getting into the weeds on preserving, protecting our most productive agricultural forest lands while at the same time going solar. I think part of the concern, and it's growing in many areas, is that we're taking out perfectly fine forests in order to install large-scale solar, and that's not necessarily the best. We got lots of rooftops, but we need to make certain that all the logistics are there. So there is definitely a paper devoted to this discussion. You can find that on in the briefing book, but we'll talk about it in a future week. So a little plug. E.C. Myers asks, how can Virginians best advocate for or support the funding of these programs that support Virginia land conservation? And then they suggest, what are some easy steps for everyday citizens? Alan, you want to try that one?
Yeah, I can start off. It's a great question. If you're already clued into the VCN network, to the Virginia LCV network, I mean, that's great in terms of getting e-news alerts or frequent updates on what's going on with policy and programming and funding. But what's, I think, critical is that, the state legislature in Virginia is only in session, really January and February of each year. And a lot of the time, those legislators are home the rest of the year. And getting on their email lists, finding out when they're having, town halls, teletown halls, would be a really good way, and I think an easy way to, clue into some of the things they're doing. If you haven't either joined or, gotten on the email list of your local land trust, wherever you are, that's another good way of getting information that you need. But these legislators who make these decisions really right about now, September, October, is when they're planning their legislative agenda for the year and planning budget priorities. And so it's critical to get to know who your state delegate, who your state senator is. There are a lot of relevant committees that pass different bills and pass different budget priorities on through, but eventually they all vote on these priorities. And at that local level, you really can have access to them. And throughout the year, they're looking for feedback and they're looking for involvement from their citizens. So that's a start. Others may have good ideas as well, but if you're clued into VCN, LCV, Piedmont Environmental Council, and then hopefully your local land organization like us or some of the other organizations on this group, you'll be getting hopefully good cues at the right time to have tools in your hands to call those legislators.
Great response. Kind of building on that, I want to throw this out there. There are so many competing priorities for public lands. Land conservation is not something my friends and neighbors see as a first order concern, like housing, food, education. So what are the hooks for getting the GA and the governor to support dedicated conservation funding?
That's a good question. And I wish I had the perfect answer because that would solve a lot of the issues. It is something we're constantly looking at. And I would say some of the big things is really tying the benefits of land conservation to a lot of those things that people do prioritize more. You mentioned in that question, food. Well, land conservation is protecting farming, that's allowing in better farm systems and sustainable foods, getting those public ties out there, getting stronger numbers, and something we're always working on really the health benefits we see from land conservation. It's not just, oh, there's open space and that's good, but that gives you cleaner air, that gives you cleaner water, and cleaning water, drinking water is something that does resonate with a lot of people. And so it's work on us to find better messaging on really tying those things together. And I'll just say from the dedicated funding perspective, that coalition I mentioned, we're continuing to work on it, and we'll be having a more public and a broader kind of announcement and campaign around this that will be working on that messaging, and really will be providing more tools to help with that. But it's a good question, and it is just really tying the great things that land conservation does to some of the things that people are more familiar and care about.
Well, thanks, folks. I appreciate all your time. I see we're getting close to time, so I'm going to hand it right back over to MC Kyle.
Everybody, I hope you enjoyed our second Common Agenda chapter overview. As we come to an end, I want to say thank you to all of our authors and all of our authors and our guest speaker today. Thank you guys for coming out. I want to say thank you to all you participants for spending your lunch with us. Next up on the 28th, we have the chapter overview of healthy Chesapeake Bay rivers and creeks. So be very excited for that. But like I said, thank you to our authors, our guest speakers, and thank you to our participants for spending your time with us. Hope to see you again on the 28th. Have a great day, everybody.